So today is Ukraine's Independence Day, and earlier they issued a special statement to the Russian invaders. Quote, "I will kill you without regret because I am defending my independence, my relatives, and my country." End quote. Now, this is part of a pamphlet that was dropped by Ukrainian forces over Russian positions earlier today. It's pretty powerful, so we're going to read it in its entirety, where it says, quote, "Occupier, you do not understand and will not understand why we do not want to be a part of your country. We don't want a dictator like you, at whose will you will soon become manure for our black soil. Perhaps you will become a beautiful sunflower or an ear of wheat grown on Ukrainian land. Freedom and independence, human life are the main values, but you don't understand that either. I'm sorry that you came to my home with the purpose of killing me and taking what is rightfully mine, not yours. But I will kill you without regret because I am defending my independence, my relatives, and my country. Happy Independence Day of Ukraine." End quote. I think that's pretty powerful and summarizes well how many people across Ukraine still today are willing and able to stand, fight, and at times die, sacrifice everything because they are fighting for their independence, for their freedom, for their families, and for their land. It's inspiring and humbling to see day in and day out. Now, as a part of this, doing what little bit we can from afar, we have an ongoing fundraiser to assist foreign volunteers that have traveled to Ukraine to help Ukraine fight for their freedom. This is the Azov International Battalion with members from all around the world. We're picking up drones, comms equipment, thermals, and night vision devices. We're at like $95,000 out of a $100,000 goal in less than 2 weeks because you all are incredible. We're going to wrap this up here hopefully in the next couple days. A quick reminder, the top 2 donors plus ties get a piece of a Shahed that was shot down over Ukraine, as well as a signed flag from the unit. 2,000 and up gets a plaque from Azov International, and 500 and up gets you a patch from Different Breed TV, our boy Vegas out there, a combat medic with Azov International. Anybody that's donated previously is grandfathered in, so you'll get a note after this is wrapped up asking for your information so the Zynga's Paw people can send you all the gear. But again, thank you all so much for your incredible generosity here, and I think today, more than ever, the Independence Day of Ukraine, it's important to highlight this and the people that are out there giving their all to maintain their freedom. Now, as a part of ongoing operations, we did get some news from the Russian Volunteer Corps yesterday. We've not heard a lot from this group recently, but big picture, and we'll play their video here, they conducted a raid to stop a Russian advance in Dnipro. Now, the Russian Volunteer Corps is a group of native Russians, many of whom were parts of the Russian military at the beginning of the war, and they defected. Quite a few since have joined the ranks of the RVC. At times, they've actually recruited amongst prisoners. They've gone to prisoners and said, who wants to go back to Russia? You can, in some sort of prisoner swap. Or if you want, you can join the RVC. RDK, RVC, it goes by both. Now, according to the statement, they say the Russian Volunteer Corps, along with the Timur Special Unit of the GUR and warriors of the 5th Separate Heavy Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, successfully stopped an enemy breakthrough in Donetsk and prevented the Russians from advancing towards the border of Dnipro. They say during the assault actions and clearances, they captured 16 Russian servicemen. Among them were flag bearers who were supposed to film fake news about the capture of Ukrainian settlements, rapid infantry assaults, tank crew operations, precise drone strikes, and footage of the capture of Russian prisoners of war. They say the scouts remind, the appearance with weapons and tricolors on our land ends the same way, with destruction. Now, when they're talking about those filming fake news about the capture of Ukrainian settlements, they're talking about these flag planting operations, and we see a lot of these. Almost every day, there's one popping up in one way or another where small elements, sometimes 1 or 2 people, even Russian soldiers, move forward through a gray area. We know that the Ukrainian lines are relatively porous, and the Russians will send people forward probing, and when they find an opening, they might move an extra 1-2 kilometers forward, hold up a Russian flag, and make it look like that territory is now under the control of the Russian military. What we have found out time and again is that might be the forward limit of the Russian forces' advance. It is by no means an indicator that that territory is fully under the control of Russia. And the RVC here is saying they were specifically going after some of the guys carrying out those flag planting operations, eliminated some, and captured others. Now, in the group that they captured, and this came out a couple days prior, so this information was released prior to the actual footage of the operation, but they talk about how some of these Russian soldiers were branded, or they had their service numbers involuntarily tattooed on their bodies. This is coming from the Russian Volunteer Corps Telegram channel, where they say Russians who have signed contracts with the Russian armed forces are being branded like cattle in a collective farm. He attached their dog tag or service tag here so you can see that the numbers match up. He says, I don't even think I need to write about the numbers tattooed on Jewish prisoners in German concentration camps. The parallels are too striking and obvious. Russia is rapidly turning into a new gulag. Residents are already being branded without asking for permission. And here you have the wonderful Russia of the future already now. And I should mention, when talking about the Russian Volunteer Corps, this is a group whose primary goal is the toppling of the Putin regime. So their focus is against Russia, more so than necessarily for Ukraine. They're fighting alongside Ukraine right now because a lot of their goals in the very short term align. But big picture, long term, you'd expect to see the Russian Volunteer Corps, maybe when this war wraps up or there's some sort of ceasefire, push further into Russian territory and maybe start carrying out some sort of covert type operations against the Putin regime. Now, I do want to stick with some battlefield updates here because there's a couple key areas that are worth getting into. First off, this is likely the area. I'll zoom out and then back in. So if we have Pokrovsk up here to the northeast, coming down a little to the southwest, this area here appears to be where that Russian Volunteer Corps operation took place. So it looks like this is probably the water feature we saw in the beginning portion of that video. And in this general area, this gray area, and maybe some of this red, this is generally where that raid took place that captured 16 Russian soldiers. Now, a couple of key areas here, starting a little south, Merny right here. This is an area that's gotten a lot of attention in recent days because it's starting to look more and more like there might actually be a Ukrainian counterattack in this area. Now, the lines haven't shifted all that much in that immediate vicinity. So on Deep State map, it makes it look like this was never taken by Russian forces in the first place, which tells a little bit of a different story. But if we go over to Syriac map, which tends to be a little more pro-Russian, I think is the way to put it, or a little slower in updating Ukrainian advances, faster in updating Russian advances, look at the difference here around Mern. How much of that territory... It's a very different picture. Like an entire section in here, Russian mill bloggers are starting to say that Ukrainian forces have been spotted in this town. So if the Syriac map is accurate, that means they pushed pretty far through the Russian lines. Not a lot of changes up here around Pokrovsk. We'll get back to the Deep State map here. I think this one's actually a little more accurate at the current time. Not a lot of changes here. We are seeing that it does appear to still be a handful of Russian forces cut off here in these northern pockets. Again, Russia's just gone silent on this. We are continuing to get a little bit of footage out of Ukraine showing the shelling of these areas. Russia is stopped talking about this by and large entirely. Zooming out a little bit here, Konstantinivka, this one as well. There's a bit of a difference depending on which map you look at. The Ukrainian map here on Deep State, you can see the progress over the course of the last 3 weeks. It's something. It's not crazy. But when you go over to Syriac map, you're going to see that there's an entire area to the east especially that shows a pretty significant advance by Russian forces that is not showing up elsewhere. So if this mapping here is correct, that shows Russian forces right on the outskirts of Konstantinivka. And we have started to see a lot of the glide bombs, large munitions, starting to strike with a heavier concentration in this area. So I did want to call this out because the mapping here seems to be a little bit different between the two. Again, Deep State map shows this entire area not even being contested quite yet. The last one worth bringing up right now, up here near Liman, and the reason it's worth talking about this is when we're looking at the Donetsk area here that Putin wants. Generally speaking, at the beginning of the war, there was a concern that rather than trying to take these fortress towns head on, Russia would try for some sort of large pincer maneuver, and that was kind of believed to be the general idea that they were pursuing. Didn't really pan out that way, but that's why you start to see some offensive pushes in other areas up here in the northeast. So when we get over here near Liman, that becomes part of the concern, is that any sort of offensive activity here or momentum could potentially be utilized to try to seal off some of these areas in Donetsk, going around them rather than through them, as has proven pretty deadly so far. Now, when looking at this area, it's, again, you're not talking about a massive change of territorial control. This is so far this month. Right? It's not a lot. A lot of this is forest belts. But either way, that's an area worth keeping an eye on should Russia decide to try to pursue some of this maybe larger pincer maneuver type operation. Now, it's not just the battlefield is not just taking place on Ukrainian territory. We actually saw some deep strikes last night carried out by Ukraine inside of Russian territory. And a couple here, they continue to target the Russian oil and gas industry with multiple refineries just like constantly on fire now, is kind of the nature. Like just for 3 days on end, we've got one here. We'll start with this one. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Novosashnik oil refinery, 3 days. This thing was hit 3 days ago, and it's still burning like out of control. But Ukraine added to this tally overnight. We know that the Ust-Luga port, located on the Baltic coast and about 100 kilometers southwest of St. Petersburg, was hit yesterday. It processes up to 13 million tons of LNG yearly. The governor of the region said that 10 UAVs, Ukrainian UAVs, were destroyed, and unfortunately drone debris was the cause of the fire. I mean, I think we have actual footage of the drones flying into the side of the terminal, but either way, drone debris, known killer in parts of Russia. But it wasn't just that one. We also saw another strike on the Sirzan oil refinery, this was hit on the 15th. I believe they stopped pumping gas at that point because it was on fire and had been hit a couple times. So this time when it hit, there was no major explosion because it had stopped processing oil or fuel, which is interesting. This specific facility, the Sirzan one, processes up to 8.5 million tons of oil per year, about 3% of the total oil refining volume of the Russian Federation. And we have seen a concerted push on carrying out these deep strikes inside of Russian territory, specifically against oil infrastructure in recent weeks and months. Unfortunately, it looks like the United States might be tying Ukraine's hands a little bit, not allowing Ukraine to go after certain targets, or really any targets inside of Russian territory, with Western-provided munitions. This is frustrating. This is Wall Street Journal reporting yesterday, because this was a problem under the Biden administration, where we really tied Ukraine's hands and did not permit them to fight the war in a way. They couldn't go after Russian airfields that were taking off day in and day out to strike Ukrainian territory. They had the munitions and the means to do it, and the U.S. said no for the longest time, which, to be fair, is one of the reasons that Ukraine really pushed to develop some of their longer-range munitions that they're utilizing today to hit these oil refineries. And we saw that deadly-looking flamingo come out recently. Got to imagine that's going to be used as well. Ukraine has had to go that route because Western partners like the United States are telling them what they can and cannot strike, what are or are not valid targets inside of Russia. So the Wall Street Journal reporting here says, quote, "The United States has quietly implemented a review process giving Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth authority to bar Ukrainian long-range strikes inside of Russia with American missiles, effectively blocking strikes for months. The unannounced high-level Defense Department approval process has prevented the use of Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, against targets inside of Russia since the late spring." And another reason that this might be confusing is just 2 days ago, like 2 days before this story broke. So while this policy is in place, President Trump posted that this was an issue and it was a major failure by the Biden administration. We'll go word for word here. President Trump, 3 days ago now, so on the 21st, 2 days before this Wall Street Journal article came out, he said, quote, "It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense but is not allowed to play offense. There's no chance of winning. It's like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out?" If there weren't lives on the line, it would almost be comical. But what do you take from that? Does President Trump know that this policy is in place and Hegseth is stopping strikes on Russian soil? And he's just lying in this post that came out of the blue, to be honest. This was not like piggybacking or anything. Just out of nowhere, all of a sudden, President Trump said that. Or does this mean that the Pentagon is carrying out some of these operations without any White House oversight? They are very clearly on different pages. Interpret that however you will, but that is drastically different policies between the DOD and the White House. Continuing on with the Wall Street Journal reporting here, they say the review mechanism was developed by the Pentagon's policy undersecretary, Elbridge Colby, and oversees Ukraine's use of American-made weapons and European weapons, which rely on U.S. intelligence and components. The new review process applies to the British long-range Storm Shadow missiles due to its reliance on U.S. targeting data, according to a British and 2 U.S. officials. They add that at least on one occasion, Ukraine has planned to use ATACMS against a target inside of Russian territory, but was denied approval. Again, there's an argument here, and there is a valid argument that if you're going to be utilizing our weapon systems, then we get some say in how they're used. 100%. Got it. At the same time, I don't know that that's always going to be the most effective way to go about fighting a war, but either way, I get that argument. At the same time, Ukraine is well within their rights, and what they're doing right now of saying, got it. If you're going to, cut down the number of munitions you're providing, and then when you do provide them, tell us what we can and cannot hit, they're going to produce their own, and that's what they're doing right now. Now, in that same Wall Street Journal report, they say that Washington approved the sale of extended-range attack munitions, ERAMs, to Ukraine. They say the missile has a range of about 241 to 450 kilometers, which is a big gap there, unusual in a lot of ways. They say, and it is meant to be quick to produce, low-cost weapon. The U.S. approved the sale of 3,550 ERAM missiles to Ukraine, which are set to arrive in approximately 6 weeks. Good news. That's great. I like that. That's a step in the positive direction. My understanding, as has been the case now for at least a few weeks, is that the funding for this would be provided by Europe. So Europe would make the purchase and the weapons would be shipped to Ukraine. No doubt Ukraine would have use for any sort of long-range munition like this. This is new. This is not like something that we have in our arsenal that we, like ATACMS, right? We have it. We just haven't used a lot of it, so we have some available. This is a newly developed weapon system. And turning over to Warzone, I'll link their article in the description below here. They gave a bit of an overview as to what we know so far, which is not a lot. They looked at the contracting document when kind of the proposal went out that the DoD sent out, and they looked at that to try to gather like what are the minimum requirements for this munition. They said it called for a 500-pound class munition with a range of at least 250 miles and a top speed of no less than Mach 0.6. The size of the munition's warhead is not specified, but it needs to be a blast/fragmentation type with at least some degree of penetrating capability and unspecified variable fuse settings. They say the ERAM's internal navigation system has to be capable of operating in a GPS-degraded environment, as in electronic warfare and jamming. The weapon also needs to have a terminal accuracy of circular error probable 50 within 10 meters, meaning the weapon hits within 10 meters of the specified impact point at least 50% of the time. It's pretty accurate. It's not the most accurate thing we have, but that's pretty accurate. They say that needs to happen in both electromagnetic interference and high degradation environments. So essentially not just on the training ground, but in a contested environment like Russia. They say the RFI called for a design that the manufacturer could build 1,000 within 2 years, or an average of nearly 42 per month. So if we back that up a little bit, if they're talking about being able to build 1,000 in the first 2 years, and Ukraine is now purchasing 3,500 of those, it seems like this order might be deployed over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, if I'm reading that correctly, unless we ramp up production in another capacity. Now, turning to a couple of the kind of diplomatic moves here in recent days, we did get an interesting statement, I think, from Ukraine's first deputy foreign minister here, talking about how the United States and President Trump are getting frustrated because Putin is playing us. And this is one of those where we see this. I think people that have been interested in following this war have looked to a lot of Eastern European countries for an idea as to how to interpret Putin and Russia and what to make of their claims, things like that. I think this is pretty spot on. But either way, let's give this a quick listen.
Russia continues to manipulate the United States and personally President Trump, and I think that becomes very annoying to the Americans. We got used to that because we are dealing with Moscow and Russia's aggression and Russian tactics and strategy since 2014. In fact, we are already in the 12th year of the war. But I think that slowly and gradually, the U.S. administration understands better that it has been manipulated by Moscow. I don't believe, I see no signs that there is readiness on Putin's side to have meaningful conversations. And
so I think manipulated is really the best way to put it at this point. If you step back and look at what we know right now, things that's come out over the course of the last couple weeks since Putin met with Trump and then Trump met with Zelensky and the European leaders, Since then, we've had no additional sanctions layered on Russia, nothing to punish Russia or to push them to the table. So that's been kicked down the road indefinitely. Well, 2 weeks, actually. We'll play that in a second. You knew that was coming. On the other side, we have not authorized any new arms shipments to Ukraine, no additional aid. We've got this extended range munition that is set to go, and that's a positive, no doubt. But when looking at like all of the equipment that could be provided today from the U.S. arsenal or stockpiles, that's off the table. We stopped sending that a while ago. And again, the reporting yesterday that we have, hindered Ukraine's ability to strike targets inside of Russia. So yes, I do think being manipulated by Russia is probably the right way to put that. Now, the foreign minister continues talking about what we should do in that case, and I tend to agree here as well. Let's layer on some sanctions. Let's go now. Here we go.
They should. I think that the set and snap mechanism should be in place, and additional pressure should be almost instantaneous when the deadline that Trump has in mind expires, and then the Russians should really feel the pain of not being willing to follow the peace path that President Trump offered to the Russian Federation.
All right, quick. Any guesses as to what President Trump... I think I already gave it away. We know what the president is going to say, right? When he was asked about this, are you going to layer any additional sanctions or anything on Putin if he doesn't actually come to the table? I feel like I don't even need to play this clip because we've heard it probably 5 times at least by now. But for the record, let's go with it.
Are you saying there's a real possibility then that you do nothing if Putin doesn't come to the table for a ceasefire or try to end the war?
I'll see whose fault it is. If there are reasons why, I'll understand that. I know exactly what I'm doing. We're going to see whether or not they have a meeting. That'll be interesting to see. And if they don't, why didn't they have a meeting? Because I told them to have a meeting. But I'll know in 2 weeks what I'm going to do. I have pretty good ideas.
Your Justice Department is...
Maybe somebody smarter than I can chime in on this. There's got to be some psychology between 2 weeks, right? Because President Trump doesn't sometimes say 1 week and other times say 4 or 3. It's always 2 weeks. There has to be a reason for that. Like, why is that the go-to in so many cases? I mean, either way, this is, I want to say, the 5th time so far that Putin has been given a 2-week leash. Come to the table or else. You can't believe that Putin is taking that very seriously. Why would he at this point, right? He probably in 2 weeks will put out some sort of note about we're getting ready for the meeting in September. There's supposed to be a meeting. Is it the United Nations? There's a global meeting that Putin and Zelensky both might be at. So expect that in 2 weeks, Putin might start talking about that as being that'll be the best place, and it'll be late September. Now, something we need to keep in mind, and I think we should continue talking about because it's not getting enough attention, is we have the means to layer pressure on Russia. And this does not mean flying aircraft or B-2s over Moscow and dropping bombs or even shooting down Russian aircraft or putting air defenders on the ground in Ukraine to protect Ukrainian cities. Sanctions. That's simple. And you can argue they will work or they won't work. There's something there. Anytime President Zelensky talks about it, he says, yeah, it works. They don't want to admit it, but there's a real reason they want the sanctions lifted, right? In part of these talks, one of Putin's primary goals has been to get the sanctions lifted. If they don't matter at all, that wouldn't be one of his 4 or 5 demands. We have the ability to go that route right now. Senator Lindsey Graham has a bill with 87 co-sponsors in the Senate. That is huge. Like, I don't think we could get 87 senators to co-sponsor a bill for a pay raise and unlimited vacation for members of Congress. Like, 87 agreeing on something, that can fly through. And they're not putting it forward. Now, I'm not very good at politics, so I don't know the exact reason they're not doing it. My gut says, my friends will tell me that it's because they don't want to put President Trump in a tough spot. Which, sorry, the president, right? You're going to be put in tough spots. That's how that works. The mechanisms are there to layer sanctions on Russia. It's starting with Congress. It's there. It would take very little to push this thing forward. Senator Lindsey Graham is even talking about that. Every chance he gets, he pushes that idea. Here we go.
And my advice to President Trump and Marco is if you got to convince Putin that if this war doesn't end justly and honorably, with Ukraine making concessions also, we're going to destroy the Russian economy. We have the ability to do it.
The longer we kick that down the road and don't make a decision, the worse it is for Ukraine because they continue to face Russian attacks day in and day out. The worse it is for our allies, in this case specifically the European allies, who are probably looking at us and wondering if we actually have the guts to follow through on anything in the face of naked Russian aggression. But overall, it's bad for us. It's bad for U.S. national security short-term and long-term because our allies and our adversaries are looking at the struggles we're having getting an economic sanctions package pushed through to punish a country that has been condemned on the world stage. These sanctions are overwhelmingly positive around the world. They're received overwhelmingly positive by countries all around the world. The United Nations, like them or not, overwhelmingly is opposed to the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. We're not. So if we can't get a sanctions package pushed through right now, do we really think that the United States is going to have an easier time putting peacekeepers on the ground, sending additional military aid to any country? Maybe it's Taiwan, maybe it's Ukraine, maybe it's somewhere else that asks for our help in the face of enemy aggression, let alone using military force against a peer or near-peer adversary. You can see how our adversaries and our allies alike would look at that and say, that ain't good. Make a decision. Let's push those sanctions through. But either way, that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.